Welcome. I'll tell you afterwards.
Good afternoon and welcome to you all on this beautiful 1st of May. My name is Robin and I'm with Gem Radio Theater, and we're very, very happy to be back here at Garnet Hill Lodge to present our history to you for you. Thank you so much for coming up. We have an open, not an open bar, but the bar is open. Right? Lucy is going to bring over a pot of black tea to your tables once we get started. So if anybody needs to refresh a cup of tea, this would be a good time while I'm quickly welcoming you. We have scones at the table. Now, is anybody here gluten-free? Because we do have a tray of gluten-free scones. It's over on the left side of the dessert table. It's covered with a dishcloth. I made them myself. They're gluten-free blueberry scones. So if you'd like to snag one of those now, that would be great. Thank you so much. I was going to bring them around to you, but I guess I didn't do that, and I'm sorry. We have 3 presentations, and then we have an intermission. During intermission, the dessert table will be open, and at your tables, we each have a little blue ticket. We have 3 door prizes today. One of them is a book written by Gloria Waldron Huckle, who's a published author, who is here today wearing a beautiful orangey outfit and is going to be our first presenter. And Gloria also has a display of her books on the table behind her if you'd like to take a look at those. I think there are just a few of her books left for sale at today's special price of $10. So you can talk to Gloria or her husband Andrew about that during intermission if you like. And we also have a book by Jane Hartenstein, who is another one of our local authors. And we also have a bottle of maple syrup that was made by Chris J., who's sitting over at this table. Is closely related to me. We are recording this today, but please feel free. Your reactions are so great for our actors. They bring the stories to life, and we have some really wonderful characters that we're going to tell you about today. I think that's it. I want to start off with a poem. I saw a book at the local library by a man named Francis Betters. He's a fisherman. He loves to fly fish, and he's written a book of poetry. And this one really kind of resonated with me with our recent snowstorm and how we're all so anxious for spring. So I'm going to read it to you now, and then we'll begin with Gloria Waldron. It's called Spring Thoughts. We await the warm spring days ahead and the rippling sound of a stream, when fragrance of blossoms fill our heads and robins appear on the scene. We seek the sounds of the songbird's voice and the budding out of the leaves, when we can say goodbye to winter's ice and go back to our old short sleeves. We look ahead to the evening's rise as the mayflies grace the air, and the chance to try our homemade flies and to see how well they fare. We salivate at the thought of trout cooked over an open fire, and the comradeship as we gather bout and partake to our heart's desire. We thrill at the thought of girls in shorts as they stroll along the street, and hunger for time on the tennis courts where new friends we're apt to meet. We relish the sound of the bullfrog song from his stage on the lily pads as the faint spring breeze drifts us along on the raft that we built as lads. But our fantasy fades as the fire heat wanes and the fireplace ashes glow. The moonlight shines through the window panes and reflects off winter's snow. The long month of March is still ahead to dampen our eager spirits. As we gather our fantasies off to bed, we'll just have to grin and bear it, as we did in the recent snowstorm. So thank you again. We hope that you have a wonderful time today. We so appreciate you coming. And now I present to you Gloria Waldron Huckle.
And I'm so happy to be here today, I really am. I hope you don't mind that I'm going to sit down though. I guess we'll just gonna sit. So, wasn't too long ago, I'm Waldron, by the way, and you know, many of you, some of you may be acquainted with or actually be a Waldron yourself. And my father was born and raised in North Creek, as was his father and his father and his father and his father. The Waldron family really came here in the early 1800s. And they settled here, and from them, this couple that was here, and they're buried at Union Cemetery. From this couple, they produced 14 children. 13 of the children survived. And they had many, many children. There is actually, I think, 100 Waldron who are buried up in the Union Cemetery. So I have been very blessed through the years because, as I'm going to share with you in a minute here, I was able to, it was a God thing, that's all I can say. I came up in search of my father, who passed away when I was pretty young. And I wanted to know more about my father's family. So I came up, and you will see what happened to start with. But I'm so delighted today to be able to read this tribute to a wonderful, wonderful lady, Cora Waldron, who was married. Her husband was Ivan Waldron. They're both gone now, but certainly not forgotten, and I've been blessed through the years to know all my extended Waldron family who have been great to me throughout the years. So anyway, the Waldron series, the American Waldron series novels, which they're over there on the table, that you can look at the first three I brought just to show what they look like. Robin asked me to bring them up. And then there's 4 books over there, I think, that I had extra, and they're soft covers of the latest one that I wrote, which is all about right here. And the characters are William G. Waldron and his wife Judah Bratt and other people, the Robley and other family people that lived here in the area. And also the other one is Souls of the Soil, which also brings together, it's 2 brothers together, one from one time period and the other 2 are from another time period, and their stories are converging. But it's also in great part influenced, of course, by none other but the Waldron family. So I'll begin, and I hope I do her justice here. I did this because I had read something that Sharon Hammond wrote. Sharon is one of the children of Cora Waldron, and she wrote something on Facebook one day, and I watch her inspirational daily news kind of thing. And when I saw this and she started talking a little bit about her mother's early beginnings, I thought, wow, that would be a great tribute. Why not make a tribute to someone who really influenced my life, you know? We always tribute people who are generations back. So this is for Cora. In remembrance of Cora Knowlton Waldron, born February 22nd, 1922. Today we gather to celebrate in remembrance of several who have long ago moved beyond this life, and it's only right that we do so, for what is the meaning of history if it is not centered by the people who, by their very being, created a future which ultimately became our shared history. And so, we begin today's history tea remembering Cora Waldron, who would have celebrated her 100th birthday this past February. According to her daughter Sharon Hammond, baby Cora arrived in the bitter cold and snowy winter, enduring a terrible flu epidemic. The flu was, as we know, an illness that without benefit of medicine quickly turns into pneumonia, threatening and often taking lives. I think we're all familiar with all this stuff right now. Such was the case when Cora was born. Within days of her birth, her paternal grandmother, Nellie King Knowlton, passed away. A few days later, Cora's father, Howard Knowlton, he died. That winter of 1922, the flu nearly wiped out the entire Knowlton family living in Knowlhurst. Cora's mother, Eva Knowlton, as well as a cousin, 15-year-old Leroy Holcomb, were desperately ill and they nearly died. There is a newspaper account of this whole ordeal published, for those who were, in the Warrensburg News of March of 1922. The article tells of how a doctor pushed through the snow and stayed through the night watching over Cora's mother, Eva, and how as soon as friends heard about the Knowlton family's peril, they rushed to them and took care of them for weeks. During this time, a relative, Mrs. Scott Knowlton, took baby Cora to her home and cared for her. Eventually, Cora was returned to her mother's arms, and after a time, Eva Eldridge Knowlton remarried to Howard Van Auken. Some of you may recognize a few of these names. Many of you are familiar with baby Cora's future. She fell in love, and she married Ivan Waldron. And the couple raised a large family. They became grandparents, and when Cora passed away in 2006, she had 21 grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Since then, the number has grown, I heard this from Todd Waldron, to 27 great-grandchildren. Many of you were the recipients of her love, her kisses, her good cooking, her wisdom and boundless kindness, and I emphasize that. Although few of you know this, I too benefited from Cora Waldron's wise perceptions. And this, in a very way, Cora changed the course of my life. And I have to stop here and say this to all of you. We all know that there's somebody in each of our lives, it could be a relative, it could be a friend, or someone you just bump into who changes the course of your life. For some reason you're walking one way, now all of a sudden you hang a left. And years later, you won't realize it then, but years later you'll say, wow, now I know why I'm here and why I'm doing what I did. And it has really to do with that person. Anyway, here's the backstory. Most know Ivan and Cora, that live in this area, were pillars of the Free Will Baptist Church. Ivan was the caretaker of the Union Cemetery, and he knew who was resting there. I was in my mid-30s when I rediscovered my deceased father's hometown of North Creek. And that discovery, as well as the Waldron series novels I've written, would never have happened if it had not been Cora and Ivan Waldron. I had journeyed to North Creek to learn more about my father and his family. My father, William Waldron, died when I was a small child. I was raised in Albany by my Catholic widowed mother, a lady very much like Cora, i.e. full of hugs and kisses. But my mother was never very informative about my father. So one day I found myself at then Smith's restaurant. Later it was Andy's, and then more recently it's Chrissy's that I just saw a little while ago. It's now up for sale again. Asking the bartender if he knew any Waldrons, and he answered he couldn't think of any. Where is Mike? Mike just said something like this to me a few minutes ago. Anyway, he couldn't think of any, but he hadn't been here, and he was a newcomer, having only lived in the area about 23 years. I was at a table and feeling pretty defeated, continuing to eat my sandwich, when an older gentleman in overalls turned to me, calling over from the bar that he had some new Waldrons, and he was on his way up there, and I could follow him. Well, I did just that. But once I was there, I stopped. First off, there was a dog barking, and those who know me know that I love animals, but I'm terrified of dogs I don't know. And there was a dog barking. But then, also, I watched as the man I had followed started talking to another man I didn't know, and suddenly, scenes from Texas Chainsaw Massacre came into my head. What was I doing? Just about then, a woman appeared in her apron and waved me in, calling down, come on in, it's okay, come on. I guess my Catholic side would say the Holy Spirit landed on me. And I wasn't afraid anymore. I walked up and joined the two men, and Ivan Waldron introduced himself and his wife Cora. I ended up that day at Cora's kitchen table eating cake, if I remember rightly. Later I enjoyed Ivan's big tour of the Union Cemetery, visiting the graves of 5 generations of Waldrons. I left with a handwritten copy, a genealogy of the Waldrons that went back to the 1600s. That really piqued my interest, I can tell you. After a whole lot of research, turns out the ancestor to all our Waldrons and others worked for old peg leg himself, Peter Stuyvesant. It's funny how one act of kindness can change the direction of a person's life. I had been ready to drive off until I saw Cora. If I had driven off, I would never have discovered the rich history of the family who settled in America hundreds of years ago. I would also have missed out on an awful lot of Adirondack cousins and the fun with those people. So I thank you, Cora Waldron, and thank you, Sharon Waldron, as well as her husband, Ken, her brother, Ivan Waldron, and his wife, Rosalie, and Todd and Wendy Waldron, for all your loving friendship throughout these many years. I have to tell you, that's a very true story, and so many things happened up in that cemetery through the years. One time I went up and I'm wandering around, someone's playing the bagpipes. I mean, I just could go on. And as it turns out, you know, when I did this genealogy thing, the funny thing is when I was growing up in Albany as a kid, I never knew any Waldrons. I used to say to my mother, do you think, you know, like they're extinguished or what's going on here? And my mother would just act dumb about the whole thing, I guess. But later, since then, and these ladies, I wish my mother had lived, because I think she would have loved all these stories and to know all these things that went on, you know, in history and all. So it's been a really interesting journey, and I would tell anyone, I tell my granddaughters, I tell all of them, if you have a chance to reach out to somebody, don't be afraid to reach out. Don't ever be afraid to reach out, because other people enrich your own life. Thank you.
Quick question. Todd and Wendy Waldron, do they live in Chestertown?
Yes. So thank you very much.
Todd Waldron, I taught at school.
There's black tea here. Yeah, did you like her?
Hello there, friends. I'd like to tell you my story. The good and the bad. We all have our ups and downs, don't we? My name is Laverne Moore. I was born August 25th, 1903. I grew up in Syracuse, New York. I was what you might call a natural athlete. I don't mean to brag, but I just about excelled in every sport I ever tried. I worked out in our attic at home, pulling up on the beams and using weights. I tried out all the sports, but the one I settled on was golf. There was just something about it, you know what I mean? When I was 7, I found a golf ball in the street. I made myself a club out of a metal pipe, an elbow, and a broom handle. That was fun, except on my first swing, I hit the ball across the street, into the window, into the local cigar shop. Oops. To my surprise, my dad wasn't mad about that. He paid for the window and bought me a new set of golf. He bought me a set of golf clubs. My older brother Harold taught me the game, and I took to it like a fish to water. I taught myself some pretty amazing tricks, if I do say so myself. One of my favorites was burying 3 golf balls in a sand trap, one on top of the other, then asking someone which one I should hit without touching the other ones. People were amazed by that one. Did I tell you I was a big guy? People loved my golf tricks, my oversized golf clubs, and I guess I had charisma, if you don't mind me saying. I left New York for a time in my 20s and did what many young men do. I sought out adventure. I went to Florida to try my hand at baseball. I was a powerful hitter, and I tried out for the Boston Braves, but that didn't work out. I went to Mexico and then to Nevada and spent some time wandering around with a pack mule. Finally, I landed in California, where my stellar golf game and amazing tricks caught some attention and brought some new acquaintances my way. I played at the Lakeside Golf Course in Hollywood and became the club champion there at 30 years old. I met some famous folks too. Do you remember Oliver Hardy? He was a good buddy of mine, and I even lived with him for a while. People loved it when we went to the grill at the golf course, and I would pick him up and put him on the bar. My size and strength became as well regarded as my golf prowess. I used to have fun making bets with my golf partners, which I usually won. One time I played with Bing Crosby, and naturally I beat him. So he wagered me one last hole, which I won handily using a baseball bat, a shovel, and a rake to hit 3 strokes on a par 4 hole. I used the rake like a pool stick to sink the ball. Thinking I had a good laugh over that one. Oh, I love my Hollywood days. Hobnobbing with the rich and famous. Imagine me, kid from blue-collar family in Syracuse, living the high life in California. I felt like I was where I was meant to be, doing my favorite thing with people that appreciated my talent. It seemed almost too good to be true, and actually it was. That was the good part. There are a few parts I left out. The first part is that I changed my name when I left New York. I was known after that as John Montague, but most people called me Monty. I really liked that name. I borrowed it from a man I met once, a judge. Remember when I said I left New York for some adventure? Well, there was another reason I left. It's the same reason I didn't become a professional golfer and tended to avoid the spotlight and having my picture taken during my heyday in Hollywood. You see, I got into some trouble in the Adirondacks in the summer of 1930. I had some friends, and we went up to Jay to check out my buddy Roger's cousin's in-laws restaurant as a potential location for a new business venture, running liquor during Prohibition. God has to make a living after all. Anyway, the restaurant was run by a fellow named Kim Han, and it was known to be a good place to grab an illegal drink as well as some good Japanese food. Well, the place was located on Route 9N, and we decided it was too risky a place to run an illegal business, being right on the rum trail and all. But considering it was such a popular place with the locals, we decided there was most likely a good amount of cash on hand. So we decided to come back and rob the place. That was a bad decision. The robbery started out fine, like most robberies do. At 1:30 in the morning, we made our move, easily tying up the Kim Hanna family and using our guns to encourage them to give up the money. It was going fine until Kim Hanna's father-in-law refused to cooperate, and I was forced to take him down and beat him up. In retrospect, I wish I'd taken it a bit easier on him. I probably shouldn't have used that iron pipe. Well, the four of us got away in 2 roadsters, but the coppers were on the lookout for rum runners, and we made the mistake of driving too fast. During the chase, the other car, driven by my buddy Billy Carlton, tried to pick the coppers by doing a U-turn and heading in the other direction. Unfortunately, the fellow John Sherry, who was riding shotgun, leaned over and turned off the lights, causing a spectacular rollover crash that killed Sherry. Billy was shortly thereafter hauled off to the slammer. While all of that excitement was happening, the car was riding in got away with the 2 of us, my buddy Roger, and me with the $700 we got to take. Unfortunately, I got into the wrong car and in my haste to leave the scene of the crime. I had left my golf clubs and some of my stuff in the car that crashed. And unfortunately for Roger, his cousin had seen him during the robbery, so he turned himself in a few weeks after that. I was long gone, however. By then, on to my new life as John Montague. I was only visiting my family in Syracuse after all, so it was time for me to move on anyway. You can see now why I was a bit camera shy out in Hollywood. But darn it, my charisma and my golfing talent got the best of me. I got caught up in the limelight and celebrity of it all, and a reporter wrote an article about me that made it all the way back to New York, where detectives had been waiting for a clue about the one person that got away in the Kim Hanna robbery of 1930. By now, it was 1937, and I was summoned back to New York to go on trial for that robbery. This was quite an inconvenience for me, as you can imagine, not to mention the embarrassment of the story revealed to my California friends. I decided to make the best of it and to embrace my past with my usual charisma. It certainly helped that my golfing talents and my celebrity friendships overshadowed the crime itself. When I arrived in Port Henry, I was met by a mob of reporters and fans. Why, I felt like a celebrity myself, and I quite enjoyed the attention. I even had my golf club sent from California and showed off some of my better tricks to an appreciative sports writer from the United Press. Supreme Court Justin O'Brien Brewster granted me bail and described me as a modern Jean Valjean. I was feeling pretty good by that time. My trial started in October that year. I became a kind of local celebrity in Elizabethtown, especially among the ladies who were always asking for my autograph. I think many people were hoping my famous Hollywood friends would come to watch the trial. They never did come. But many sent statements and dispositions attesting to my wonderful character. My actor friends would have been proud of me too, because I did a good job on the stand explaining how embarrassed I was to have my belongings found in the getaway car of criminals. So much that I had to leave town and change my name. I found out who my true friends were too. That son of a gun Roger, the one who turned himself in after the robbery, testified against me and even accused me of being the one who beat up Kid Hannah's father-in-law, Matt Cobb, the one who gave us such a hard time during the robbery. My other buddy Billy, who had been driving the getaway car that crashed, swore that I wasn't there that night, that my things were left in the car from a previous outing. Now that's a true friend. It's good to have friends like those in times like that, in high places. My lawyer was the same one who defended Dutch Schultz in his famous trial of 1935, where he got off the hook. My lawyer, James Noonan, tore holes in the prosecution one by one. My mother Mary even testified that I was home in bed that night. That was the power of a mother's love. I hadn't had any contact with her since I left in 1930. I think she was pleased to have celebrity for a son. Don't you agree? When the jury returned the not guilty verdict, my fans, the audience in the courtroom, cheered wildly. Judge Owen tried to shut them down, but to no avail. There was a big celebration and my future looked bright. There was talk about making a movie of my life. Jackie Gleason was going to play me for a part of the movie. I continued playing golf exhibitions. Now, I was a celebrity in my own right, and I enjoyed every minute of it for the short time it lasted. My big movie deal never did materialize. I suspect the trial may have had something to do with that. I got married to Esther Plunkett, but she passed away in 1947. I was always reaching for the high life I had enjoyed before my trial, but I took to drinking, and that can change a man. I gained weight, which for a big guy like me can affect one's health. My golf game never did take off, so I never went pro. What I liked best was playing golf with a few people that I could impress with my trick shots and enjoying drinks at the club. I had a heart attack in 1947 and was arrested for drunk driving in 1949, so you could see the good days were slipping away. I faded from the limelight and my charisma and self-esteem faded away too. I died in 1972. At that time, I was living alone in a motel in Los Angeles. I died alone and broke, but that's okay with me. I had an amazing life. I saw many sides of life. The poor, the rich, the good and the bad. I was a celebrity and a criminal. And I was loved by some and hated by others. I can say that I lived my life to the fullest and enjoyed almost every minute of it. How many people can say that?
Folks, it's me, Cassius. I am so happy to be with you once again on this beautiful day. I'm here to share my stories from back in the day. As you can see, my green Carhartts and red suspenders still fit. I'm a bit proud of that after having spent so much time indoors avoiding the recent plague. I see you've survived that too. And I'm sure glad that we can be here together on this fine day. If we're meeting for the first time, my name is Cassius Cleveland. You might say I'm the brother from another mother to another old-timer who we won't mention by name. I wear my green and reds to honor an old friend of mine, Roy Cleveland, who used to live on the Cleveland Road right here in North River. Some folks call it Cemetery Road. You might remember the story I told a few years back about Susie the pig and Roy's applesauce donuts. My mouth still waters when I think about those donuts. Well, there's another house on the Cleveland Road that used to be blue, and we called it the Blue House, until my brother John painted it red. Now it's the Red House. There was another name for it though, long ago. When we were kids, we lived in Port Washington, down on Long Island. Many families lived in the city and bought places up north for the fresh air. My grandparents were among them. My father, Frank, spent many summers here and moved up with my grandmother during the Depression, while my grandfather worked for the post office in the city. So naturally, my father eventually bought a house here too, since his 9 children wouldn't fit in Grandpa's small house on Castor Line. The house my father bought was the Blue House on Cleveland Road, right down the road from Roy's place. You might remember the story about my brother and me dropped off there to plant 1,000 trees or to fill a 100-foot-long ditch for the water pipe. Those were just a few examples of the jobs my brother and me did on the farm that contributed to the new name that we bestowed on it. Those jobs happened when I was 13 and my brother was 11, and my father would drive us up to North River to get some work done before he brought the rest of the family up for the summer. He would bring us up, explain what he wanted done, like just plant these 1,000 trees in a straight road toward the back field. Then he'd head back to Port Washington, saying he'd be back in a week to check up on how we were doing. Well, Grandpa was over on Castor Line Road and checked up on us every once in a while, but I was a resourceful young lad, and me and John were just fine. We never did tell Dad how we planted those trees so fast and so perfectly straight, and he never remembered leaving the keys to the tractor where I could find them. My brother and I still laugh about that. Well, let me tell you, the ride from Port Washington to North River was no fun back then. There were 9 children and a dog stuffed into the old station wagon, and my father wasn't one to stop and smell the roses on the way north. We drove by all the fun places you used to see along the roads before the Northway was built. We drove by Freedom Land in the Bronx, Playland in Rye Beach, Pleasure Park in Poughkeepsie, Hoffman's in Albany, Fairyland in Saratoga, and Animal Land and Storyland in Lake George. Did we stop at any of them? No, never. Because our dad said that all the fun was waiting right here in North River. I hate to disagree. One day when we arrived in North River with that big long list of projects, my brother and me got to thinking about all those fun parts we never got to visit. We made up a few names for the farm. One new name for the farm, Bowser Land, where fun came to die. We still always refer to that place as Bowser Land. We named the place after old Bowser Cleveland, who my father bought the place from. His name was Arthur, but everyone called him Bowser behind his back. Roy was his brother, who eventually bought the place next door, which was the old Deep Farm. If you've ever heard me talk before, though, you know that John and me had plenty of fun at Bowserland after the chores were done, of course. If you drive on Route 9 through Saratoga, you might see a salvage place where Rapunzel's old tower used to be, with her hair still hanging down. If we were lucky, on one of the trips north, we would see the prince heading up the track to rescue Rapunzel, and then he would slide all the way back down to try again. The poor guy, he never had a chance. Well, we Flatlanders would gather up here every summer, and the parties would begin at the end of June and last until Labor Day. Doc Stannard would fly his plane up from Port Washington with his pontoons filled with liquor for all the grown-ups. He kept his plane on 13th Lake next to what is now the Garnet Hill Beach. We kids were pretty much on our own all summer, and we came to the house to eat once in a while and sleep. Our parents could party like you wouldn't believe. They used to go down to the Buckskin Valley Lodge off Garnet Lake Road for square dancing. Sometimes they loaded us kids in the car to come along too. We had fun wherever we went, and our parents did too. Sometimes, though, they had a little too much fun. One time, two men started a fight at the square dance, and my friend's mother, Gloria, stepped in to try to stop it. Well, she got pasted in the eye, and then the whole place erupted. My mother jumped right into the fight with her. Oh, it was wild. But our moms were rough and they were ready. The dads, though, were having none of it that night. They loaded us kids into the car and we all went home. But I don't remember how my mother got home. She must have eventually. Since I was the oldest boy in our family, there were many times when I drove my parents home from a party, even though I was only 11 years old. Like I said, our parents could party with the best of them. No wonder that I turned out like I did. My dad was a nature lover. He used to take me into the woods to hunt and to camp. When all the kids' cousins and friends were up in the summer, he used to lead us on hikes through the woods to our pond. Sometimes there were a dozen or more of us following him on the trail. Shh, he would say. If we're quiet in the woods, we might see something. That didn't always stick with some of the kids. There was usually someone at the end of the line, like Skipper Holtz, who would yell, "Hey, mister, when are we gonna see the animals?" My father would just turn around and give us the look. You know the one I mean. When we were very young, my dad would take the family camping on the river up the railroad tracks. There were 9 kids and my parents. The 2 youngest babies rode in saddlebags on our donkey's back. And we carried the rest of the gear. We would stay for a week by the river. I remember bath time. Oh boy. My dad would take us to the middle, dip us in the river, scrub us with the soap and the dip, and shake us again, and we'd come up sputtering and coughing. With 9 children, one didn't mess around or lollygag. We fished for dinner and we hiked, sat by the fire and listened to stories. Those were really happy memories. Sometimes I hike up the tracks to see our old campsite and remember the good times. Of course, after spending so much time in the woods with my dad, I grew to love them too. Many of my younger days were spent hiking in these parks, rafting the Hudson River before it became popular, and rock climbing back in the 70s. We used to go 4-wheeling in my Jeep and use it for ski joring on the dirt roads in the winter. My friend Rick and I used to hike all the time. One time, not too long ago, we were hiking up Balm of Gilead Mountain, and there was a beech tree that snapped and fell across the trail. We sat on the tree for a bit, and we saw off in the woods that the tree had broke about 10 feet up. I spied a giant fungus on that stump, and you know the kind you take a stick and write or draw on? You've probably seen those. Well, Rick got a good idea in his head, and he made his way over to that fungus and wrote something on it. Guess what he wrote? He wrote, "Hi, asshole." It was such a big fungus that anyone who saw it would have to go and take a look. We laughed about that all day, and even to this day. Did any of you see it? Sometimes when I see a fungus in the woods, I write that on it. It makes me laugh. What can I say? I think we all need to laugh more these days, don't you? Well, my friend Rick, he is one of a kind. The next time we meet, I'll tell you more about him. We've been through a lot, through thick, through thin. He was there for the Cannon story I told you back in 2020, and that was a classic. But it's time for me to wander now. I hope to see you around soon, and hoist a beer by the fire.
Your tea, come and get desserts. Anything that's on the way left is gluten-free. Thank you.
I want to tell you something that my grandfather told me a long time ago. We were down here in North River. We were visiting my Aunt Hattie. She lived those days on a farm, well, just right down the road a bit. It was early winter, and we took a walk down to 13th Lake. It had been cold for a few weeks, and there was just a light dusting of snow. The lake had frozen over, and Grandpa decided we should go out a bit. So we did. It was pretty cold, and the wind picked up and swirled the snow around our feet. It took on a strange whistling sound that frightened me so bad I grabbed my grandfather's hand. Don't look down, Prudy, or you might see him under the ice looking up, my grandfather said. Oh, that scared me to no end. Who, Grandpa? Let's head back right now. Seville. They say he was killed right here at 13th Lake. They never found his body, and some say he was put right here in this lake and haunts it when the wind blows. Of course, I was mighty curious about Seville, so my grandfather told me all about him, and I'm going to tell you. You probably already know that the town of Indian Lake was named after Seville, and that a section of the town is called Seville. He was born around 1742, Seville was, in Penobscot, Maine. His parents were Penobscot Indians, Joseph Louis Gill and Marie Jean. The family went up to Canada after the French and Indian War and joined with the Adirondack Abenaki tribe up in central Quebec. Sabille was 12 years old when his father fought in the Battle of Quebec. He went along as the cook and the helper. His exact birth date remains unknown. Can you imagine not knowing when your own birthday is? Somehow along the way, Sabille added his name and eventually went by Francoise Benedict, Francoise Sabille Benedict, but mostly just Sabille. Some people say he had friends named Benedict and he liked that so well that he just took on their name. He married a girl with red hair named Marie Angelique. It was said that a friend gifted him with one of his daughters for his wife, and he chose the girl with the red hair. They had a son named Louis Elijah Benedict. Did you know that they named Louis Lake after him? My grandpa told me that too. There was also other children, twin girls, Catherine and Margaret Benedict, but I'll tell you about them a little later on. Well, times got hard up in Canada, and so Sabille went looking for a new place to live. It's been said that he wandered down from Canada and through the Adirondacks looking for just the right spot. Did you know that back then the Adirondacks were a good place for criminals to hide out? Somebody told my grandfather that some of those criminals became hermits and lived in the woods for the rest of their life. Why, can you imagine that? Well, Sabille came down through Indian Pass and went by many good places that were already settled until he came to Indian Lake, which then was a river connecting smaller lakes. It was beautiful, quiet, and perfect. He built a circular structure of logs and covered it with animal skins and sent for his wife and children. They lived in the Narrows by a place they now call Squaw Brook, after Marie Angelique, where the stream comes down from the mountains in the hamlet of Sabille. This was before the river was dammed up to make Indian Lake. You can only imagine how beautiful and peaceful their lives might have been. Living off the land, a simple, happy existence. Sabille and his son did some guiding and made friends as settlers moved closer. When his beloved wife died, Sabille sewed Mary Angelique in deer skins and buried her by Squaw Brook. When the river was dammed up for logging in 1860, her burial site was covered by the newly formed Indian Lake. It was said that she haunted Sabille and that he wore a magical beaded necklace so that when he paddled, he would offer beads to the chippies in the water when her restless spirit was about. A close friend of Sabille was a traveling preacher by the name of Reverend Todd, who came about 1841. He wrote down quite a bit in a journal about his good friend Sabille. That writing can be seen at the local museum in Indian Lake that's open in the summer. Ask the town historian Wayne Blanchard. He'll show it to you. In his grief after Marie Angelique passed away, Sabille moved across the lake to live a more solitary life in a similar manner, choosing his native lifestyle over more modern dwellings of the new settlers. He continued to wander the mountains, guiding with his son, sometimes going off alone, or coming back with a pack basket full of lead or other ore. Some folks say Sabille went as far as Tawas and found quality ore, and that his son Elijah guided the David Henderson party that claimed the area and opened a mine. But that's another story. Have a sip here. Sabille traveled mostly by foot, as woodsmen did back in the day. As the crow flies, the distance between Indian Lake and North River isn't that far. and it was said that Sabile often came to stay at 13th Lake. There he made friends with another Indian, John Johnson, and spent his time in his own little camp by the lake. On one of those trips, Sabile met his fate. The exact date and motive is unknown, but they say Sabile was murdered in 1855 at the age of 108. Some folks say that John Johnson was accused of the crime, then later was exonerated. Some say that Sabile was killed for his secret stash of gold and silver that's still hidden in those woods, or that the lumberman killed him for the land that he may or may not have owned. The most popular theory is that Sabile got into a ferocious fight with his disagreeable grandson and was killed. The ones who know the true story are long gone, so we will never really know what happened to Francois Sabile Benedict. His body was never recovered, and that's why my grandfather scared me so bad when I was a little girl. I think he did that to all of his grandchildren to keep us off the ice. My grandpa used to say that if you brushed off the snow, you might see a skull and crossbones, or Sabile's face. I could never look. I just stayed off the ice. I still get the shivers when I hear that wind blow up there. Okay. Before I go, let me just tell you a little bit more about Sabile's children. Elijah, or Lige for short, is buried up by Lake Durant. If you ask for Ranger Jay in the summer when the Lake Durant campsite is open, he can tell you where to find the memorial. Catherine, one of the twin girls, married a man named Michael Algene in 1820. They had 5 children, and some of their descendants still live in Indian Lake. There's the Mitchells and the Fishers and, oh yeah, the Antwells. All of them descended from Sabile Benedict. Margaret Benedict, the other twin, married a man named John Camp from England. They had 2 sons, John and Elijah. Elijah married a girl named Elizabeth and had a beautiful little girl named Emma. Emma married a man named Gabriel Meade. Emma is buried in the Indian Lake Cemetery along with her daughter, Bessie. But that's another story for another time. A sad and true story that has repeated itself throughout history as people from different backgrounds and cultures fall in love. So for today, let us tip our teacups to the man who wandered to our little town of Indian Lake those many years ago, and whose name and descendants remain to remind us that he lived and died in our beautiful little part of the world. A man who had songs and poems written about him. To Sabile.
Sabile. Sabile.
My teacup and just thank you for sticking around so that you can hear my story as well. Now, I just want to point something out real quick to you. I know y'all have this little tag here, this bookmark. Well, one side has me on it, you can tell. But then the other side has this person who may look a lot like me. But I guarantee you I am not this Adirondack beauty. This is Sabile, okay? My friend Monty over there, look, handed this to me. He said, "Is that you?" So I just want to make it clear that this is a gentleman here. He may be dressed like me, but he's not this beauty right here on this side, okay? Okay, just wanted to make that clear, Monty. Well, once again, very much for sticking around so you can hear my story. My name is Jess Elliott. I'm from way up north here in the Adirondacks. I was born up in Lewis County by Beaver River. You ever heard of it? I was born in 1885. My parents were Chester and Adeline Elliott. And you know, people call me Jess for short. One of those Adirondack beauty names, if you know. Yes, I had a pretty wild life in my younger days. Let me tell you about it. It's polite company for a tea party to take your hat off and take this out here. Now, some people have called me the Adirondack Calamity Jane or Annie Oakley. I am very flattered by that, by the way. Now, I think it's kind of a stretch since we don't live in the Wild West. But, you know, back in the day, the Adirondacks were pretty wild, too. And, you know, some places still are, depending on who you choose to consort with. You know what I mean? But I did spend lots of time in the woods hunting and guiding. So I did pack, you know, a gun and other things, you know, most of the time back then. And yes, I did wear breeches, and I happened to look a little bit like Sabine, maybe. But you know, not most of the ladies my age, you know, they don't dress like this, and you know that's fine by me. But I'll get into that in a little bit. But let me tell you about my family, since they influenced my life in so many ways. Now, my father, Chester, he was a hard-working man all his life. In his early days, he worked at a mill that made hemlock bark for tanning. His uncle, Joe Dunbar, my great-uncle Joe, he was the foreman of that business. Now, in 1878, my dad's Uncle Joe, great-uncle Joe, bought property on the Upper Beaver River and built a sportsman's hotel. Now, in those days, the Adirondacks were very popular for people coming up from the cities to hunt and fish and, you know, experience the Adirondacks. Now, my dad and his brother, William, my Uncle Bill, they worked at the Dunbar Hotel until it was sold in 1892 to a group of guests who made it into the headquarters of their private camp on Beaver River. Now, this is where my father, Chet, had a brilliant idea. He liked the wilderness life, and he saw potential in the sportsman's hotel business. Very savvy of him. Now, he also knew that a train station was being built right up Beaver River a ways. So he and my Uncle Bill and my dad's Uncle Joe, great-uncle Joe, well, they built a new hotel near the train station where the south branch of the Beaver River meets the main flow. This was near the place where the sporting guests would camp. But, you know those city folks. Why camp in a tent when you could rest your weary bones in a nice hotel bed? Yeah, the hotel business suited our family just fine. We all moved there during the season. It was my mother, Adeline, my two older brothers, and me. We spent the winters up in a neighboring town. And I was 7 years old in the early days at the Elliott camp. My mother, Adeline, was the cook, and we kids, we did the chores to help. My dad was the consummate hotel keeper. He met all the trains with his horse and wagon, and he made sure to embellish all the wonderful amenities available at our hotel. Very fine, very much like this tea party here. Now, he even had a little homemade steamboat docked up the river, and he would ferry guests 20 miles upriver to the private camp he used to work at. Well, Dad, he named the boat Wild Jess. That gives you a little idea of the kind of person I was. Now, the early days of the hotel, they were great. We were the only place to stay that was near the train station, and folks loved the food my mother and I cooked up for them. My brothers became guides. All three of us were experienced in the woods, having lived up here for so long. But by the time I was 18, I could ride, fish, paddle, hunt, and shoot with the best of them. Better, than most of the city slickers who came up on that train. Yeah, I had fun. challenging those flatlanders to shooting, running, or canoe races. And you know, of course, I beat the tar out of them. I love surprising people with my unfeminine skills. What can I say? Just so many talents right here. Incredible. But you know, our hotel was written up in newspapers many times. You know, I even got some mention too. You know, I suppose that was the beginning of my reputation. I don't care though. You know, I think a girl should do whatever makes her happy, don't you? You know, I wasn't meant to live the life of a quiet lady who stays in the background. You know, I wanted to show the world what I could do. I loved the wilderness life, and it loved me. You know, I had another interest too. I had a camera, and I used to take pictures of our guests, and I would sell them. Indeed, also a photographer. I even added some color to the pictures. Another one of my many talents. That was, you know, was one of those that was ordinarily performed by men back in that time. Not me, not me. I'm just so talented. Now, by now, I was in my early 20s, and I must have been quite of a looker because men started noticing me. I told you I was one of those Adirondack beauties. I can't help it. I can't help it. Of course, you know, it might have been my ability to bring home the meat, skin it, prep it, cook it. Another talent. But I married William Yaker in 1909. He was from Oneida. You know, it didn't take long for me to realize he wasn't the right one. Beaver River, it was calling me back home, so I divorced William, and I went back to the camp in 1910. But then in 1912, after 20 successful years of running the Elliott Hotel, my father, he sold it, and our family moved to Carter Station to run the Clearwater House. That was a hotel by the railroad spur to Racket Lake. The station agent at Carter was Bud DeLong. He and I hit it off right away. We got married in December of 1913. We moved to Utica, where Bud got a job as a telegraph operator for the New York Central Railroad, and you know, neither of us took to living in the city. I guess I just wasn't meant to live the life of a proper housewife. You know, Bud and I, we went back to the Adirondacks in 1914 to live in Long Lake West, and that's now referred to as Sabattis. And then in 1915, we went back to Carter to help my parents out at the hotel. You know, I guess I'm just a family girl. I knew when my parents needed me, I went to help them every time. Yeah. I'm glad I did too, you know, because my mother, she passed away in 1917, and then my dad in 1918. Very glad I could be with them during those times. You know, I was a bit lost then too. I must have needed a change because, you know, I left Bud. I left Bud, that was in 1920. Now, you may think poorly of me for leaving two good men, and some people said some not very nice things about me. But, you know, like I said before, a girl should have the right to do what she pleases, and I have met a man who would please me very much. His name was Harry Smith, and we were just like two peas in a pod. Harry loved the Adirondack wilderness as much as I did, and we romped through the woods like two kids in a candy store. We found jobs at George Bush's lumber camp at Woods Lake. You know, it was just down the road from Beaver Station. Oh, we were the camp cooks, and what a good team we were. You know, Harry found another way to make money at camp. Bootlegging. It was during Prohibition, and can you imagine loggers getting along without some good hooch? Well, you know, somebody had to scratch that itch, and my Harry. My dear Harry. You know, some people have accused me of being an accomplice, but I will deny that till the end of my days. And that's not to say I didn't sample the goods from time to time. You know, a girl has to do what a girl has to do, you know what I mean? But, you know, sadly, the Bushy camp burned down to the ground in 1921. So, Harry and I opened up a lunchroom for lumberjacks in town. You know, Beaver River was a wild place back then, let me tell you. The Black River Regulating District had hired loggers to clear 4,000 acres from 1922 to 1924 to create the Stillwater Reservoir. And the town was just full of loggers. They were everywhere. They lived in the shanties and camped everywhere, you know, many of them from Canada and other places. It was as wild a place as you can imagine. You know, Harry and I did well at our establishment with both the food and the other venture I mentioned. Prohibition, to my way of thinking, is a black mark on the history of our country. It also left a black mark on my Harry because the federal agents raided the town and arrested him in 1923 for selling 1 shot of whiskey to an agent for $1. All that fuss over 1 shot of whiskey. You know, he was arrested in 1924 again. Garnet. But you know, I suppose I was lucky that they left me out of it. You know, it may have been my good looks. But you know, it also might have been my pistol and, you know, my leave me alone or you're gonna get hurt demeanor. What can I say? At any rate, I was getting tired of this life and I was ready for another change. In 1924, the Black River Regulating District paid me for my property in the flood zone for the reservoir. I moved over to Lewis County, where my mother was from. Oh, by the way, I left Harry behind. Along with my wife as a bootlegger's lady, you know. We never did get married anyway, but I sure had a good time with Harry back in the day. Now, I've been accused of many things. Being a woman of ill repute, you know, a bootlegger, an untamed wild thing, and more. But you know, I take those as compliments. Yeah. I lived my life the way I wanted to. If that can be called wild and free, then I guess that's what I was. I never had children, but I can say that I was a good daughter to my parents. And I loved 3 good men, and they loved me back. They sure did. But, you know, I died alone from complications of pneumonia, June of 1928 at the age of 43. But at the time, I had 3 good dogs too, just like earlier. And they kept me good company right up until the end. And no, my dogs did not eat me like some folks say. They wouldn't do that, not ever. They love me. But I had no regrets about the way I lived. Well, you know, maybe one, just one. I wish I'd gotten to know that good-looking fellow that came to lunch the room on Fridays. I think we could have had some fun. Now, wouldn't you agree? Cheers to that, my friends. Cheers.